But the best shift happens when it stops being about you and it starts being about the company and the mission. And in fact, I've seen that when that shift happens, those are the people that grow the fastest. And those are the people that, because it is always harder to push yourself for yourself. It is far easier to push yourself for a larger cause or for someone else. And so when that shift happens in people's heads, I think that's when I've seen the maximum growth happen as well.
Welcome to Entrepreneur's Handbook Podcast, where we tell inspiring startup stories with practical takeaways for you, the listener. Today's guest is Prukalpa Sankar. She was named as the Economic Times Emerging Entrepreneur of the Year, a Forbes 30 Under 30, and a Fortune 40 Under 40. She is the founder of two major companies. The first was SocialCops, which aimed to revolutionize the way that data was used across large-scale organizations pursuing good causes across the world. On the back of that, she founded Atlan, which has recently completed its Series A round. Atlan aims to make data teams more efficient and more effective, and is being used by large organizations all across the world, such as Postman and Unilever. She's an inspiration to many people, and I really hope you enjoyed today's conversation. Welcome to Entrepreneur's Handbook, Prukalpa.
Thanks for having me.
I'm curious to get started straight away into what got you into entrepreneurship in the first place. Like, you started as SocialCops and then went into Atlan, but what gave you that desire to get going?
So I think I'm sort of what you call a career entrepreneur, because I founded my first company with my co-founder Varun right out of university. We both went to NTU in Singapore. I think a lot of my sort of fascination with entrepreneurship comes from my childhood days. My mom was a really big inspiration. She, believe it or not, when she was 21, she invented a device and she got it patented, and she actually managed to secure funding for it. But unfortunately, family and things like that back for women in the 80s didn't allow her to become an entrepreneur. But she sort of really persevered through my childhood. And when I was in school, she joined the founding team of this education company. It was called a company then. It was not a startup. They were, I think there was a period for about 2 months where 4 people were working out of my house. And I just saw like my mom's, like, she used to have 20-hour days, but she was so energetic and excited and passionate because she truly believed in the work she was doing. And I think that possibly in my very early days was what sort of sparked this fascination in some ways with entrepreneurship. When I went to university, I studied engineering and entrepreneurship. It was really never the plan to start up right out of university. So it was always going to be do 2 years at McKinsey, go to Harvard Business School for a couple of years and then figure out what you want to do. My co-founder and I were working on a couple of different projects, just as like hackathon ideas and things like that in university. And SocialCops was actually just born out of a passion project. We were these 21-year-olds. We were like, hey, large-scale problems in the world, like national level healthcare and poverty alleviation, they didn't use data. We were like, it feels like they should use data. Let's go do something about that. And in fact, we actually started out in a very unique way. This was when crowdfunding campaigns were just starting to get popular, at Kickstarter and Indiegogo and things like that. And I remember going to these websites and I was like, oh man, like they're getting funded for like, $50,000. We're saying we're going to solve the world's biggest problems. Like we will totally get funded. So one random night we put together a video and we launched this crowdfunding campaign, went to sleep at 4 a.m., woke up the next morning and it had gone, I guess in my definition of viral back then, right? Hundreds of people commenting and liking and connecting us to my mom who does this, who might be interested, or like, my uncle does this and you should talk to them. And since then, there's not been much looking back.
Yeah. And so it was founded while you were still at university. And then I guess once you finished, you went straight into it and you didn't look around at McKinsey or anywhere else. Was that an easy decision to make, or did you just decide, or was it kind of tough to be like, I'm going to do this full time and not look elsewhere?
It was a really difficult decision because back then startups weren't really cool. Like I feel like now startups are kind of, it's more respectable in some ways, or people don't look at you like you're crazy. People looked at us like we were crazy. Like I've had people tell me things like, why are you doing this? Like, you're throwing away your life, and you're like, which is very jarring things to hear from, often people that you respect, right? So it was a very hard decision. In my 4 years of university, I personally didn't know a single other entrepreneur. And we had sort of, through university self-funded ourselves, like, we had worked in investment banks, all the high paychecks, all of that stuff, right? And so I think for us, a very big decision came down to, we want to make sure when we graduated university, we didn't have to go back to our families and ask them for money. And so we had to get really creative about it. So for example, Varun and I, we actually took part in student business plan competitions around the world. So we were like, what do we have? We have a student card. These business plan competitions would give you like $2,000, $3,000 if you win. We ended up actually winning a ton of competitions that year. We raised over $25,000 of prize money. And that prize money gave us enough capital to say, hey, okay, like we can go do this full time for some time. And, if it doesn't work out, we'll go back and get jobs. But I think there was an emotional and then there was a rational decision. The rational decision was, let's create enough capital for ourselves that will give us 1 year of runway. That will just allow us to go do this full time. And the emotional decision, I think, when we started working on it, I don't think there was a going back from the emotional decision. I think the emotional, like the emotion of it was just trying to find the the outcomes rationally that you could go and do this for.
You mentioned as well that your mother was put back a bit because she was female in India and people didn't necessarily respect her enough, even though she had all the ideas. Do you feel like you've had that same pushback, or has everyone been supportive for you?
I think I've been very lucky. So I'm right from my childhood. Like, I don't think I've ever felt any different because I'm female in this world. Like, so sometimes when I see these like female entrepreneurs, I kind of feel like a little flaky about it because I'm like, I've really not actually had much of a different life. My mom and my parents, my family, obviously played a very important role there, right? Like for my mom, she was like, I want to make sure that my daughter doesn't ever feel different and has all of the same sort of environments and opportunities that a male kid would. And I think from there, I went to university in Singapore, which is actually incredibly open-minded, and you're typically looking at 50-50 class sizes, even in really complicated engineering degrees and things like that, right? And so I think that helped a lot. And I think, surrounding yourself, I think the way I think about this, people ask me this a lot, which is, what's it like to be a woman entrepreneur? Is it hard? Is it challenging? And I think the way I think about it is that everything that you do, 50% of the world will be bad. And that's okay, right? In some way. I mean, being an entrepreneur itself is hard. Like, 90% of people are going to tell you that you're doing something wrong in the early days, right? And I think that's true for women, not just women entrepreneurs, but women in general in the workplace. That's true. But the way I think about it, it's always 50%. There's another 50% that is not. And I think you can control that for yourself. You can't control the random person on the road, but you can control the people that make your inner circle. In our case, it's my co-founder, it's our investors, it's our team members, it's all of those people, right? And you can very easily say that these are the kinds of people that you want in your life, and these are the people that you don't. And if you are able to do that, sometimes it's hard because sometimes you're saying no to customers that you might, that are important customers or could be helpful customers. But I've almost always found that if you do really great work, that's the only thing that matters. And all other labels, how old you are, how experienced you are you male, female, like all of those things sort of just go out the window. And if you can just stick to that, things generally tend to work out.
Yeah, and I'm glad you've had that support around you and you've got that self-belief, because I think there's some people I know in my own life who think that they can't do it because of different labels. So I always like when people have made it and you can prove, no, there is nothing stopping you. There is this opportunity and you can take it. You said as well that when you decided to create your own company and to go straight into a startup after university, that people telling you that you're crazy and that you shouldn't do it. Was there a moment where you think everybody's minds changed? Was it like you got to a certain point with SocialCops and everyone was like, okay, I was wrong, she was right, this is a great idea?
Yeah, so many times, right? I've had investors who passed on us in 2013 tweet about it and say, oh my God, this was the biggest mistake we made. Or, absolutely, like a lot of people who would say that, and I think that's what success creates, right? Like if you succeed at things, then it's harder for people to say no. No, you shouldn't have done it. I mean, there's no other. What will you say, right? I was right, but it worked out for you. That doesn't make sense, right? And I think I don't know necessarily because I don't keep in touch with a ton of the people, right? One of the things I try and do is surround myself with positive people in general who are trying to uh, who try and push you forward. I think the more you do that, being an entrepreneur is a very hard journey. You need a lot of optimism to be able to make it through. And so in your life, again, like the way I think about the inner circle is you want to create an inner circle that's going to be positive. That doesn't mean that you go in and so the way I think about it is one is people telling you that you can't do it. And the other is people telling you that actually I think the way this you're structuring your model is not going to work. And I think the second is actually very constructive feedback. And I actually today, in fact, try and invite it. Like one of the questions I ask people is, "What am I missing? What are we going? What are we? Why will we fail?" Is a question that I ask constantly. And maybe people will be right or maybe they'll be wrong, but it gives you another data point, right? It gives you something to think about, and it helps you succeed. Knowing why you'll fail, it actually helps you succeed. And so the second is something I actually don't have a challenge with it at all. The first is where I think, if there are people in your lives that are telling you that you as a person cannot do something that you want to do, they should not be in your life and you should probably not keep in touch with them 5 or 7 years later.
Yeah. And in those early days, do you remember if there was any particular bits of feedback that really helped? And once you took those on board, then you saw the progress because of that?
That's a great question. In the early days, maybe not. I think there was definitely a lot of feedback, but I don't know if there was one specific moment that I remember that changed our trajectory. And I also think that's probably true for everybody. Like, I will be very surprised if a single conversation was able to change the trajectory of a company. But I think it's a lot of that's what being an entrepreneur is about, right? It's about connecting the dots. And there's a ton of dots. I think a lot of people played a role in every decision that we made. But I don't know if there was a single one.
Yeah. And in those early days as well, so it started off with just you and your co-founder. Obviously, you then built up the team. How did you find that process? Because you came straight out of university and you hadn't worked for a long period for another company. Was it difficult to make that transition into going from working for yourself to then being a manager and a leader?
It was hard. The first 12 months was definitely hard, right? Because we had never hired anybody. We had never had anyone work for us. We'd never been a manager. And I do think we made mistakes. I think we hired the wrong people. We made several hiring mistakes because back then we were just like, anyone who potentially, agreed to work with us, that was such a thing, right? Like, why would people come work with us? We didn't have credibility or any of those things back then. And I think we learned from some of those mistakes. We also were very fortunate that there are some people that found us, like our first and second engineer. There are engineering leaders today at Atlan. We've been working together for 8 years, 9 years now. And so we also found some people who grew with us, who took a bet and grew with us. And those are people that I'm incredibly thankful to. But we made a ton of mistakes back then. There's some things that I think the one thing that I've learned is though keep the bar high, no matter where you are in your life. Like there was a moment when I think we got to this point where, we felt, oh my God, we've never done this before. And we don't know how we're going to do it. And we don't have the experience. And we have to go hire all these experienced people. And then we hired people for their experience. And then we realized that actually they weren't as good as we thought they would be. And I think the one thing that everyone or that I take away today is that every company is different. Every company is unique. Nobody can take a playbook that they built somewhere else and come and make that work in your company. And so you need to build a playbook that works for you. You need to hire people that work for you. You need to hire people for your standards. And so the one thing that we have taken away, for example, our culture is we have this value we call one team. And our culture is sort of built around this thing on saying, nothing should matter except the outcome of someone's work. And that means you take away all the labels. For example, this could be pedigree, this could be age, this could be experience levels, this could be gender, this could be, any potential label that you can look at goes away. And so we've created a hiring process and an interview process that tests for that, right? For example, we have this phase that we call a challenge phase. And the challenge is a real life problem statement that you take on before working today at Atlan, right? And it is an intensive process. You sometimes are, we expect people to spend over 2 days on that challenge. And people drop off. The reality is that people drop off in that process. And sometimes we've had very experienced, great candidates with great, sort of backgrounds who've said, really, you want me to do this? And the thing that was really important to us was that actually, but if you are going to come and be a leader at Atlan, you have to believe in our values. And our values are that you have to show through your outcomes and not through conversations, right? And we expect you to do that. And so if you cannot believe at that level, if you think about your life, 1.5 to 2 days is, you're making a decision about where you want to go spend the next 3 or 4 years of your life. If you are not ready to invest 2 days into that process, then maybe you're not the right person for us as well, right? And so that's been hard. It's been hard to stick to that. But what it's helped us do is that when we bring people in, we are able to create a culture which is truly sort of a meritocracy. I think that is worked well. So I think just learning what matters to you and what your culture stands for, and then building the process for that has been the one thing that I've learned a lot as an entrepreneur.
Did you find your ideas about what the culture would be like changed over time? Or was it when you started at the beginning, you're like, this is what I want the company to be like? Because I think often I hear from founders, or you see it online, for example, where founders say that they had this ideal right from the very start. Whereas I think what you said there, and what I think is more common, is that it's as you go along, you start to discover what you think the most important things are and what type of a team, what type of people you want in your company. So do you think, for a new founder starting out, they should think right at the very beginning, this is what I want? Or should they be adaptable and think about, let's see what happens, let's try and get the right people, but we're going to understand who you want more as we go along?
Yeah. So I think a couple of things. I think the way I think about this is that there's values, there's culture, and there's rituals. I think the culture and the rituals of a company change with every stage of the company. For example, maybe when you're a 5-member team, the entire team comes together and does a stand-up every day. You all have lunch together. It's very different from a 100-member team, which is very different from a 1,000-member team, right? I think that changes. I think what shouldn't change is the fundamental values of a company. I think that's what the initial founding team creates, right? In some ways, that's what becomes the values of the company. For example, I talked about this notion of one team. And that fundamental notion stems from a belief that we truly believe that people can be amazing, and amazing people can be anywhere, irrespective of pedigree, irrespective of college name, irrespective of age. We believe 20-year-old somethings can do things that are better than people who have 2 or 3x of experience. We also believe the other way around. We also believe that it doesn't have anything, that we truly believe outcomes have nothing to do with age and nothing to do with, experience or pedigree or whatever, right? That's a true belief. That shouldn't change. And it means sometimes making difficult decisions. Sometimes we've had clients who've said, we want a account manager who has a MBA from a tier 1 university. And we've had to push back on that and say, why does it matter to you as long as we can do the job as well as you'd want us to do the job, right? It shouldn't matter to you. And those are difficult decisions sometimes. Those are difficult conversations to have. But those are values that you stick to. And sticking to your values in times that will mean your business will, it's going to actually have a negative impact to business. That's what makes values, right? And so the way I think about values is your values should stay with you irrespective of the business. Even if Varun and I go found another company after this and another company after that, I don't think our values will change. The culture and the rituals will change, as the company grows and things like that.
Yeah, it's actually mentioned there, SocialCops was the first company, but Atlan was kind of birthed from SocialCops, right? Can you tell us how that came about?
So, a little bit about the SocialCops story. We basically very quickly became the extended data team for our customers, who are typically folks like the UN or the World Bank or the Gates Foundation, several large governments. They didn't have data teams, they didn't have technology teams, and they wanted, us to solve their data problem end to end. And that's really where I learned everything that I learned about building and running data teams and how complex and chaotic they can get. Because a data team is one of the most unique teams ever created to make a data project successful. Analyst, engineer, scientist, business, lots of different kinds of personas that need to come together and collaborate effectively. That diversity is actually a huge strength, but it's also one of our biggest weaknesses as a data team. It makes collaboration really hard. So the day-to-day was a nightmare for me, right? I mean, we were doing this very cool work. At one point, we were processing data for 500 million Indian citizens, billions of pixels of satellite imagery. It sounds really cool, but every day was a nightmare. Like my Slack channels were filled with messages like, what does this column name mean? Or, I've had cabinet ministers call me at 8 in the morning and say, Prukalpa, the number on this dashboard is broken. We don't know why. And I've done this wild goose chase of calling 5 people in my team and trying to figure out what went wrong. Doubled our team this one quarter and thought it would solve all our problems, only to realize that none of our new analysts were getting onboarded because they didn't actually know what the data was or what data they could trust or things like that. We were also sucking on the productivity of my existing analysts, right? Overall, we were net worse off than where we were when we started the quarter, like those kinds of things. And if you think of these problems, they were much more human collaboration problems than they were technology problems. So we hit a breaking point. We realized we couldn't continue to scale like that. We actually started building an internal tool for ourselves to make our team more agile and effective. Over a couple of years, we built tooling that made our team 6 times more agile. We went on to do things like we built India's national data platform, which the Prime Minister himself uses. We were a global partner for the UN on the SDGs. And that's sort of when we realized we built these tools that were more powerful than what earlier intended. And they could actually help data teams around the world. Data teams were starting to become more and more mainstream, and org fabrics, like you can go on to say for every entrepreneur watching, right? 20 years ago, product teams were really new. Today, you can go on and say that a company without a product team is likely to be obsolete in the next 20 years. The same thing is true for data teams today. You could go on and say that companies that 20 years out will not have a data team are likely to be obsolete. And that's sort of when we said, can we build this collaboration layer for every data team around the world? We truly believe that all the amazing things that are going to happen in the world in the next couple of decades, right from man on Mars to self-driving cars to a cure for cancer, they'll all have an amazing data team behind it, and we want to be the collaboration layer for those data teams. So that's really what the journey was like. So it was actually a very organic journey. Atlan was born out of a problem that we faced ourselves. We never meant to sell the product to anyone else. We just built the product for ourselves and realized we'd build something that could help many, many more data teams around.
Yeah, I think this reminds me of the story of Slack as well. There's a few companies like this who, what they were trying to build is something different, but then the tool that they were using to help them do that actually had a huge market. And I think from what I know, you've already worked with huge companies with Atlan as well. So Postman comes to mind, I think Unilever and other companies like that. And how did you get those huge clients, even at SocialCops as well? Like, you graduated from university, created a startup straight away. How did you manage to land these big multi-international companies as clients?
So, I think today at Atlan, a large part of it comes down to the product, right? Having been a data team ourselves, building the product for yourself, I think that creates product that can be pretty powerful. And that can be, and today I think a large part of, we have amazing customers that I am so proud of playing a small part in their journey. And I think a lot of it just comes down to building a great product that can solve user problems. And I think I think we have our journey at SocialCops to thank for. Someone the other day was telling me that, SocialCops is like the spiritual predecessor for Atlan in some ways, right? But truly, I think our journey as a data team ourselves, all the challenges that we went through, the empathy we built, I think that's what helps us build the best product out there today. And I think building the best product out there helps us win these amazing customers that make us really proud. Back then, and I think actually the answer to everything that I have, like even back then, like at SocialCops, when we landed our first customer when we were 21, I think a large part of it just comes down to work, right? And how good work can be. The one thing I have learned is, and we have sometimes salespeople who come to us and say, we have these amazing relationships and we can help you close these sales. And it's something that I actually don't believe much in personally. I truly believe that in this world, to do anything scalable, to do anything success, sure, there'll be like one or two stray things where relationships matter, and maybe you get like, you get your foot in the door. Maybe relationships help you get your foot in the door. But I think ultimately what matters is, can you solve someone's problem on the other hand, and can you give them value? And can you do that really well? If you are able to hold yourself to that bar consistently, and you're able to, so at SocialCops, for example, we just had to prove ourselves, right? Like, why would someone give us a massive project? They probably won't, right? And so, for example, when we went into a meeting, we didn't go into a meeting with a presentation, we went in with a prototype. That builds trust. Because the world revolves around trust. Why do people buy from people they have relationships with? It's because they trust them. It's not because of the relationship, it's because of trust. So if you don't have trust, then you have to build trust. And what are the other ways you can build trust? You can show amazing work, and you can use that to build trust. And so over time, as we were growing, obviously, we did projects, we put our heart and soul into it. We were very successful. We didn't take it like, our client projects for us at SocialCops, they were not client projects, they were our projects. For us, it was like the client is giving us the opportunity to do something we want to do more than, right? And that was the mindset. And that helps you go far beyond what a traditional vendor would do, right? Today at Atlan, that value stands. We have this, we have this saying we say, don't be a vendor, be a partner, and do the right thing as a partner for your customer. And I think that helps you go in and ultimately build trust. And we've been very fortunate to have these amazing customers who have trusted us to help them a little bit in their journeys.
Yeah, and I think that's music to a lot of people listening, because I think so many people worry that they can't be successful or can't do what their dreams are because they don't have the connections. So knowing that you can do the opposite way, not the opposite, but a different route, which is just build an amazing product. And if you can show that, then people will come on board. And you mentioned before that you had a cabinet minister call you, and you said that the Prime Minister of India uses some of your technology. How did you find that, like, from an emotional perspective, when you went so fast? Like, you went to all these very high up people. Was it just kind of another client, or did you have that kind of extra pressure that you felt?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely, right. And we face that with every client. Like, in some ways, like every year, I think you stretch yourself, and with every customer, or with every year, I think every company needs to stretch itself. Otherwise, you're not growing. And obviously, it's really hard when the person on the other side is, and in some ways, for me, when like I talk about this personal problem a lot. When I still remember when the cabinet minister called me, and he said, "Prukalpa, the number on this dashboard doesn't look right." And it was 8 a.m, and I opened up my laptop, and I look at the dashboard, and I realized there's a 2x spike in the data in a day, and that's clearly wrong. And I couldn't do anything at that time. And so I said, "Sir, I'll call you back." And then I called my project manager, and then I called my analyst, and then I called my engineer. And then he pulled out audit logs, but he couldn't troubleshoot it because he doesn't know what the variables mean. It took us 8 hours to figure out what went wrong. And that's part of it. Agility is a problem. But I think the worst part about that, for me, was that at some level, trust broke. Right? At some level, the cabinet minister didn't trust me the same way. Right? It's not even that something broke. It's the fact that I couldn't tell him why something broke. I couldn't tell him this is what happened in that call. And at some level, my trust on my data engineer broke. Like, I wasn't sure if, my data engineer was messing up, or it was really a pipeline issue, right? And that fundamental need in some ways was what, the emotion we went out to solve with Atlan, even when it was an internal tool, was that that should never happen again. Like, a client shouldn't come and tell us that something broke. We should know that something broke. We can tell the client that something broke, right? And then how do you build systems and processes and things like that to help you get there? I think with each of these things, just being true to yourself and doing your best. Sometimes we haven't done our best, and sometimes we haven't met even our own standards. And those are learning experiences, and those are situations where you have to truly apologize and hope that the person on the other side will give you another chance. But I think just being truly humble and trying your best and holding yourself to a very high bar with that. That's like something I've seen people do is say, I've never done this before. And because they haven't done it before, it's almost like an excuse that you can do a substandard job at it. And that's something that frustrates me to no end, right? Because in today's world, not doing something before cannot be an excuse. There's all the resources you have. You want to write a blog, all the resources that you need are out there. You want to build a website, all the resources that you need are out there. There is no reason. Even if this was a case like 25 years ago, I would be okay with it, but it is not the case today. If you put in your heart and soul and try really, really hard and put in enough effort, there is no reason why you cannot be better than most people at doing something. And so I think just holding yourself to that standard is important along with the intent.
So my background before what I do now was in tech consulting. And I completely agree with what you say, because pretty much every single thing I did as a consultant was something I'd never done before. So my skill wasn't what I knew, it was what I could learn quickly to solve a problem. And I think for anyone in tech now, that's what you've got to do. You can't think, oh, I've got to read the manual and then I can do things that are in that manual, because anybody can do that. The skill is, how can you take the bits of knowledge that you already have and apply them to a new problem? And as you said, that's what gets the trust, because that's when clients, for me, for example, they trust me because they knew that something would break. Things always break, but it's a trust to know that you can fix it. And your story about the cabinet minister calling you, I think I've read that on your LinkedIn, and it's one of the reasons why I decided to reach out to you, because I like the way that you're very open about these different issues you face as a founder. And I can see like you've got quite a large following on LinkedIn as well, people following that journey. Is that something you enjoy doing as well, sharing that story and that founder's path?
Yeah, something that has always mattered to me in some ways is how do you, when you learn something, how do you sort of give back and pay it forward? Pay it forward is something that matters a ton to me. I had a ton of people who helped me in my journey, that I learned a lot from. I wouldn't be where I am today without those people. And I think as we think about growing, like, to me, that sense of giving back to the community is important. This is, be it entrepreneurs or founders, or be it the data community, which is a really important part of a community, like other data leaders that have gone through the same kind of challenges that we have. There's some things you can do in the world that can add value, right? There are few things that can help other people out there in the world, and these are ways to do that.
Yeah, and you mentioned before the call started that a lot of your day now is spent in different calls, and you've got all of the different project teams from across the world. When you initially started, obviously, it was just based in India, and then you expanded internationally. How was that process? How was it hiring your first person in another office or setting up the other office? What was behind that decision, and how did you go about it?
So SocialCops was a fundamentally India-based organization. We did a ton of work in India, but even when we were doing global work, we were doing work. We actually at one point were doing work across 50 countries, but a very large part of our team was based in India. But Atlan was always a global company. We went live with our first customer sometime in 2019. And, it was very clear to us that the kind of data teams that we were spotting, that we wanted to power the best data teams in the world, a large part of them were in the US, 70% of them were in the US, but the rest were just scattered around the world, right? And so for us, as we were building Atlan, our North Star mission became, we want to help dream data teams. We want to help create these dream teams in data around the world. And, we wanted to be in the cutting edge of the best teams, the most innovative teams. And I think, so on day zero, it was very clear that we have to be a global company. And so we started architecting our company to be that company. And, these are actually very minute decisions. For example, what grammar do you use on your website copy is a decision you have to make. Do you use American English or do you use English? That's a decision you have to make as you think about going global or just holding yourself to that global. What is the level of quality bar that you want to set for yourself? If you want to be one of the best products out there in the world, companies in our space have a stereotype. They're typically stereotypical, built mostly out of the valley by someone who came out of FANG, right? That's just a stereotype in our industry. And Atlan is breaking those stereotypes, and that matters to us, right? We are a fully global company. We have teams in 10 countries, all over the world, from Philippines to Nigeria to the Valley and New York. And that matters to us, that sense of, hey, the best products in the world can today be built from anywhere in the world when the best people around the world come together and collaborate. I think that is the fundamental that we go after. And I think from there, once you make your ideas, I think this goes back to values, right? So at Atlan, that value was very clear on Daisy. And once that value becomes clear, then you just have to execute towards it. We started going remote and started building a remote culture even before the pandemic happened. The pandemic just helped accelerate it for us, and just forced us to do it faster than we were anyway planning to do. We hired the first few folks in our go-to-market team. Almost our third or fourth hire was in the US. We very quickly ended up getting from 1 to 4 countries. And then once we got to 4 countries, we're like, okay, we can do this in 4 countries. We should just hire anywhere around the world, right? And so then we just started accelerating and hiring basically everywhere in the world. And it's worked out really well for us. I think today, again, it goes back to the same thing. It goes back to, luckily, we didn't have to go through the ordeal of setting up a new office, because we are a fully global distributed team, right? So in some ways, your culture is synonymous across your offices, right? And so that's that. I think it's harder to build a company that has offices in 100 locations is actually pretty hard. We didn't really have to go through that. And so what we just needed to screen for was people with the same culture fitment anywhere around the world. Going back to my one team value, in some ways, it helped us accelerate that. We've put in a lot of work on things like building a documentation first culture, so that time zones is a real problem at some point. We have a 1 hour time frame every week where we do a weekly all hands, and honestly, the only way we can do it is when is literally we need some team members are on the call when the sun is rising, and some team members are on the call when the sun is already set. And that's literally the only way we can get everyone on the same call, right? And so you build documentation first cultures, you build principles like that can help the team be work together effectively. And those are things that we've done some things that have worked. We're learning along the way as we scale that.
How many employees do you have overall now at Atlan?
We just touched 100.
Yeah, and that's in 10 different countries.
Yes.
Do you find that one day you'd like to meet everybody, or are you kind of committed to now being fully remote? And
we have committed to being fully remote, but we will definitely meet everybody, retreats and, things like that we will commit to. And we're looking to do more of that. Human connection is harder in remote, right? I think that's the one thing that is harder in a distributed team. And so I think finding ways for people to meet and just build human connection is definitely important. So we're definitely looking to commit to, more regular schedules for retreats and things like that can help the team meet in person and just build more human connection.
For companies who are currently fully based in one location or one country, what advice would you give them about hiring people internationally? Because you said you test for their values and their culture. But obviously, as you said, it's a little bit harder to get that human connection. Have you found any ways to really nail that down so you can be sure that it's the right person?
So, I think the first thing is make sure that you want to hire internationally and make sure you want to hire for the right reasons. So, for example, sometimes I see people say that, I want to go to this one country because I want it to be a back office location or, something like it's cheaper or whatever. And I think that's a terrible reason to decide to go international, right? Because then it will permeate into your culture and maybe it's a very different way that you want to hire. So I think first, just figure out, it is hard. Building a global team is really hard. We have to getting taxation done in every country is incredibly hard. Benefits is really hard. In the US, in every state, it's a different way of dealing with benefits, right? So committing to being a global company is actually really, really hard. It costs a ton of money. It's really painful. From an HR perspective, it's a ton of work. So I think the first step is you have to commit to whether you want to be an international company or a company that's broadly based in 1 or 2 locations, or how you want to structure that. I think the second thing from there is, I would say, be very specific about the kind of talent you want to hire. Let some of it happen inbound before you start actively investing in building a team in a certain place. That has worked the best for us, where we've said, this is the position we're hiring for, and we're hiring for it remotely everywhere around the world. And let everyone go through the same interview process. And if you start finding amazing candidates that are somewhere else in some other part of the world that meet your requirements just the way somebody in the current country that you operate in does, that's a good signal. And maybe like give it a shot and hire them. And then if they work out, maybe that gives you a sense that, hey, like this is a country that might work for us from a talent perspective. So I'd say being a little organic about it does help. You could also be very specific about it. Maybe, you know that, a large bunch of your customers are in this one location. You want someone in that time. So you could, but that's the easier part. Like, I mean, that is a pretty easy decision to take. But for the rest of the countries, or the rest of the international expansion, I'd say that would be a little organic.
And what are your plans for Atlans Future in terms of expansion? So you've been growing very fast in only, I think, 2 years or so far. What's the dream and what you're aiming for next?
So the dream is a little cheesy. We have this thing that we call the dream wall at Atlan. So every time someone new joins, you actually add to the dream wall. And the dream wall question is, we want to be the icon on the desktop for the data team that does X. And, we have answers like for the data team that solves climate change, and the data team that, finds the cure to cancer. And, I think we truly very fundamentally believe that any amazing thing that happens in the world in the next couple of decades, there will be a data team behind it. And we want to be the icon on the desktop behind that data team. And so the way we think about that, like, I don't know if you saw this, there was actually this photo when NASA sent up the Mars rover, and they were in command center and they were collaborating on Slack when that happened. And that was a very powerful moment for us that we're very inspired by, right? Which is like, think about this company, Slack, which 600,000 organizations at the time use, and NASA was using it. And you can say it played a role in us, and NASA signing up the Mars rover. And that's just amazing. I think software is one of the few things in the world where you can actually claim to be able to do something like that, where you can, in like a short time span of like 5 to 10 years, actually create that kind of like widespread impact in the world. And I think that's the dream, or the long-term vision in some ways that we're working towards.
Are there any clients you're working with at the moment? So I know you've got quite a few inspiring clients, but one that is really personal to you that you're really happy and it's almost a dream come true already?
So many, right? I mean, I started my last year with, there's, large healthcare organizations that played a huge role during COVID. These amazing startups that are like reshaping like what's happening in the world with, electric vehicles and, the future of mobility. And, you mentioned Postman, like changing the way developers work, companies reshaping fintech. I think almost every second or third client that we get, like, we're just so in awe of the kind of amazing work. But even today, like, we're so inspired. Like, there's this company that runs a very large app that does predictive menstrual health and hygiene for over 50 million women. Like, those are really cool customers, and it's great to play a small part of their journeys.
And for you yourself, so you've started 2 companies now. What's your ambitions in the future? Do you want to keep growing Atlan further and further? Do you want to be the CEO of a very large company? Or do you prefer the early stages?
That's a great question. I think I'm still on that journey. I will know. At this point, the one thing that I have learned, and I think people get this wrong about entrepreneurship a lot, everybody thinks it's a way for you to do what you want to do. So, sometimes I hear people say, I want to be an entrepreneur because I don't want to work for anybody else. And I think that's the stupidest thing I've ever heard in my life. Because, when you're an entrepreneur, when you're working for someone else, you can tell your boss that you want a day off, or like, you can check out. You can say that somebody else is looking out for you. That doesn't happen as an entrepreneur, right? You are working for everybody. Like, I think of it as a service job. Like, you are responsible to your team. You are responsible to your investors. You are responsible to your customers. It's a lot of responsibility. And so I think the reason you do it cannot be because of what you want to. The reason you do it needs to be about what you want to create or what impact you have in the world. Because if it comes down to what you want to do, there's a ton of things that you're probably going to have to do that you don't want to do. And that's just the reality of being an entrepreneur, right? And so I think today, for me, like, I think I do what I do because of what I believe in, which is what I believe data teams can do in the world. Frankly, as we grow and scale the company, I would like to do what is best for the company at every stage of the life cycle. I think once you start looking at it from that lens, and some of our founding team members look at it from that lens too, and I think they've been the best, right? Sometimes I have people, and you have different kinds of team members all the time, right? There's some that are very personally driven. It's about I want to get here. These are my career goals. This is what I want to get to 3 years from now, 5 years from now. And that's okay. Some of them are very driven and they contribute a ton to the company. But the best shift happens when it stops being about you and it starts being about the company and the mission. And in fact, I've seen that when that shift happens, those are the people that grow the fastest. And those are the people that, because it is always harder to push yourself for yourself, it is far easier to push yourself for a larger cause or for someone else. And so when that shift happens in people's heads, I think that's when I've seen the maximum growth happen as well for people. And so, something I've embraced, but I've also seen it when other people embrace, it has done a world of good to them.
Yeah, I really like that. And I think what you even mentioned before about your ambitions for Atlan, about being able to make that change for these different companies. And it's also, you're already doing that. You've already made such a change with the organizations that you're supporting. So it's almost, sometimes you need to take a step back and just appreciate what you've already achieved too. Because I know you can always be thinking about the next thing about you want to make even more change, but you've already done so much. So I guess try and make sure that you also appreciate that for yourself too.
I will. My co-founder Varun tells me that all the time. Like, don't forget to enjoy it. Don't forget to enjoy the journey. And I think that's something that, like, it's always about the next thing, and that's a good thing. If I'm the kind of person where it's always about the next thing, I take very little time to I'm very hard on myself, so I very rarely take time to appreciate where we've come. I think it's important to embrace the journey and not just the outcomes.
So you said that you're very hard on yourself. How do you stop yourself from being too hard on yourself and almost burning out? Do you have any kind of things you do in order to keep yourself healthy and in a good state of mind?
I mean, I've just embraced that I'm hard on myself, and I think that's okay. As long as, being hard on yourself should not affect your mental health. If it does, then you should stop being hard on yourself. I think the one thing that I have changed about myself is I used to take things very personally. Literally, there was this one time when someone sent me a message saying, I think this thing on your website is broken and it should be done better. And I cried. Because I was like, oh my God, yeah, it should be so much better. I can't believe it. The website thing should have been fixed. Ultimately, I have to take ownership for it. And that wasn't good, because the reality is that, there are fires everywhere. And it also, I think, made it hard for me to distance myself. Because the reality is when you take things personally, you are defensive. And being defensive makes it hard for you to grow. And it also makes it hard for people to give you direct feedback. And so I think the one thing that I've done is I recognize that something's broken and it's okay. What I do is I decide which ones I want to fix. So, for example, sometimes I would go into a conversation with someone on the team and they're like, oh yeah, this thing is totally broken. We totally have to fix it. And, I'd say, yeah, I totally agree with you. I just don't have the bandwidth to fix it. If you want to go fix it, you should go fix it. But I'm not going to look at this. And so one of the things, just the hacks that I've done is I solve one problem a month, which is outside of work and goals and things like that, company level problems, we need to fix onboarding or things like that. Those kinds of problems are I try and pick one problem a month. And that's just given me a lot of sanity to say, okay, everything else, I recognize it's a problem, but it's just not something I can get to fixing right now.
Yeah, and I think that's really healthy attitudes to take, because there's always going to be problems. Nothing is ever perfect. And behind you, I can see a massive bookcase with lots of different books. What's the one book you'd recommend to entrepreneurs who are listening today?
I would definitely recommend The Hard Thing About Hard Things by Ben Horowitz. I think it is one of the best sort of very real books that have been written about business today. That would be my favorite recommendation.
So it's been a pleasure to have you on, Prukalpa. For people listening today who want to find out more about Atlan and find out more about you, where can they go to?
Atlan, www.atlan.com. And if you'd like to, know more about me, I write a ton of Twitter threads on Twitter. So at Prukalpa on Twitter or LinkedIn. I write a newsletter called Meditator Weekly on Substack. So if that's something that you'd like to subscribe to, that would be awesome.